announcement number 2, if you look in the upper right-hand corner of Zoom, you will notice that there are 2 options. One is for speaker view, and then there's also a gallery view option. So for speaker view, it will highlight the person who is speaking, but for gallery view, you will be able to see everyone who is present on the event today on various screens. Completely up to you. We just want to make sure that you enjoy tonight to the fullest. Also, we have all of you muted in hopes of improving sound quality. And we are happy to have you here in any capacity. If you would like to have your video on tonight, we would absolutely love to see your beautiful faces. But if you are unable, that is perfectly fine, and we are so happy to have you here. Finally, we ask that you please send your questions in the chat. We will be having a Q&A live later tonight, and we are really looking forward to seeing what questions you have for Justice Montoya-Lewis tonight. Thank you so much. So tonight, we would like to start off with a land acknowledgement. We, as the Latino Law Student Association at Gonzaga University School of Law, recognize that due to COVID, many of us are spread far and wide throughout the nation in our virtual worlds. We want to acknowledge that every single one of us is sitting on stolen land, the land of our indigenous communities. We express our deepest respect for and gratitude to the original caretakers of this land. I'm currently meeting with you all from the unceded ancestral lands of the interior Salish peoples, specifically the Spokane tribe of Indians, a people that are still here, continuing to honor and demonstrate that indigenous existence is resistance. For our incredible justices who have taken the time to meet with us today, Justice Montoya-Lewis, Justice Yu, and Justice Gonzalez, I would like to recognize that Olympia is the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Nisqually, Cowlitz, and Squaxin Island peoples. Wherever you may be sitting today, I encourage you to research the original peoples of your region, learn the history, establish and maintain relationships with our tribes and native peoples, and support tribal sovereignty. This is one way to reject generations of systemic erasure and genocide and amplify indigenous voices. A wonderful resource is the website native-land.ca, where you can learn about whose land you are currently occupying. Indigenous peoples are not relics of the past. We are still here, and we continue to demonstrate our talents and gifts amidst a backdrop of ongoing colonialism and oppression. We are worth celebrating. Justice Montoya-Lewis is worth celebrating. My name is Bailey Warrior Pahang, and I am a descendant of Lummi Nation, the Lakhtamish people, which translates to survivors of the Great Flood. With that, I would like to formally introduce my amazing co-host.
Thank you, Bailey. And I just want to invite everyone to please just take a quick pause with me to soak that land acknowledgement in. Thank you, and thank you for those powerful words. We are grateful that you have joined us to listen to Justice Montoya-Lewis's amazing story that has been an inspiration to many of us. My name is Izzy Carranza, the proud son of Mexican immigrants. We are humbled to be your host today. Now we would like to turn it over to our faculty advisor who has been instrumental in making this event happen for us, Professor Brooks Holland.
Thank you so much, Israel Bailey. A wonderful opening, and I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to introduce Justice Montoya-Lewis. Let me first say, one of the most rewarding things we do as faculty is support our student organizations as students work outside the classroom to develop their professional identity. And one of my proudest experiences has been to work with this student organization, the Latino Law Student Association at Gonzaga. I think as this event illustrates, this group of students really exemplifies excellence and authenticity in everything they do in their commitment to legal studies, professional development, community, and social justice. With gratitude, therefore, I, on their behalf, will introduce Justice Montoya-Lewis. Welcome, Your Honor. We're very pleased to host you here at Gonzaga virtually. Justice Montoya-Lewis joined the Washington Supreme Court in 2019 when she was appointed by Governor Jay Inslee to that post. She came to the Supreme Court with a wealth of judicial experience already in place. She served for a number of years on the Washington Superior Court for Whatcom County, a court of general jurisdiction for that community. She also brought years of judicial experience for tribal courts, not only in the Pacific Northwest region, but around the country, where she served as a trial judge, an administrative chief judge, and an appellate judge, helping to ensure community justice in the tribal courts throughout this land. She also brings to the bench academic experience and perspective. She was an associate professor at Western Washington University in an interdisciplinary legal studies program there, where she taught a wide range of courses and engaged in research. And she also taught at the University of New Mexico School of Law in their legal writing program, research and writing, of course, being essential to the work of an appellate justice on the Supreme Court. And you can imagine with that experience that she has been able to contribute her expertise and her time in a wide range of capacities of service on boards and other community organizations, and she has been recognized with a number of awards. Her educational background is she has a JD from the University of Washington, along with a master's in social work, and she obtained her bachelor's degree from the University of New Mexico. And she is an enrolled member of the Pueblo of Isleta and a descendant of the Laguna Indian tribe. And she also shared with us some personal details that maybe we can add to the mix today. She let us know that she is an endurance athlete and even has competed in about a half dozen marathons, often for charity. She is a jewelry maker, an activity she really enjoys. I don't know whether Zoom will be a good platform for you to show off your work, Justice Montoya-Lewis. But she also let us know that she loves a great music concert. So she's a real down-to-earth person for the conversation we're going to have today. Lots of dimensions we can explore, and I'm honored to welcome you to the school. Now let me hand the Zoom mic back to Bailey and Israel, our hosts, so that they can kick off the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Holland. We really appreciate it. And Justice Montoya-Lewis, we seriously sit and ask ourselves, what can't you do? You are absolutely incredible. Earlier this year, the Latino Law Student Association had the honor of meeting Justice Montoya-Lewis when she came to visit Spokane. And we were all moved by her humility, her relatability, and her clear commitment to uplifting the voices of marginalized communities.
And I think it's also important to add that our Washington State Supreme Court bench is just so special. As someone who's raised out of state, I never grew up seeing people who look like me in positions of power, and seeing our justices that are so in tune with the concerns of marginalized communities, it's just so inspirational to me. And it gives me so much hope of what is possible in other places.
I just want to take a minute to echo everything that Izzy said. Justice Montoya-Lewis, you give our Indigenous communities hope that our stories are worth listening to. So I want to thank you for that. At this point in the evening, we would love to transition into the Q&A portion, the most important portion, where we get to hear from Justice Montoya-Lewis herself. And so we have had some incredible community members submit questions for you, Justice Montoya-Lewis, and we are all so excited to hear from you. With that, I'd like to pass the mic back to Izzy.
Thank you. And Justice Montoya-Lewis, we like to start off with those hard-hitting questions. So this first one is a twofold question. So since COVID-19, much of our world has become virtual, and we have been thrown into this world of just Zoom meetings, right? So first question is, what is one thing that you have learned about yourself during this process? And then two, would you be willing to share a funny or embarrassing story about a Zoom nightmare? Because let me tell you, I know I've had a couple.
Okay, yeah, I'll be happy to share an embarrassing story, and it is funny too. But before I get to that, just to answer the first part of your question, you know, I think that what I have been sort of amazed by in terms of the shift we've all had to make during the last 6 or so months with COVID is, you know, how adaptable we are and how creative our community, all our communities, but our legal community can be. All the things that we're doing, like having court virtually, working with clerks at a distance, all of those kinds of things are things that I would have said a year ago would not be possible. And so it's really exciting to see what we're able to do. And I think, although I think there are all kinds of access to justice issues that are raised by use of technology in order to access courts, I also think there's a lot of possibility with respect, with that. And so that's something that I've been, just excited to see. So to add the second part of your question, we are doing oral arguments through Zoom, and we started in March, and we're going to continue to do that at least through the end of December, or the end of our fall term. And so that has been a process for all of us to learn, how to do that and how to do that in a way that results in the fewest interruptions. So we had a day where we were in the middle of hearing an argument, so the middle of counsel talking, and my Zoom just quit. And I initially thought that it was, the Wi-Fi or something had just, the modem dropped or something like that. So I run downstairs. I'm in my robe, by the way. I run downstairs to restart the modem, and I'm madly texting the justices. I'm trying to get back on. I'm so sorry. And then I realized, it took a couple of minutes, but I realized that I can't remember how I figured this out. Oh, I know. I woke my husband up, who was asleep, and I was like, "You have to help me. You have to help me." And he had no idea what I was talking about. So he eventually figured it out, and we realized that the entire part of the whole neighborhood was out. Like, there was not going to be any internet connection for us. And during that entire time, I ran up and down the stairs probably 4 times in my robe. By the time I actually got reconnected, which I think ultimately was only about 3 minutes, but it felt like it was an hour, I was completely drenched in sweat. But I came back in just like nothing had happened, and we picked back up. But it was horrifying. And unfortunately that day, there were, I think, 3 other justices that had similar kinds of problems all in one day. So hopefully we got all our tech problems done in one morning. But I felt terrible for counsel who had to sort of, roll with it, which they did.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Justice Montoya-Lewis. I'm really sorry that happened, but it definitely happens to the best of us, that's for sure.
Sure does.
I also love to hear that you went and woke up your husband. I frequently go and bother my husbands to help me with technical difficulties. So Justice Montoya-Lewis, we are hoping that you can tell us a little bit more about your journey to the bench.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'll just start off, and I've shared this with some of you, but I went to law school not ever having spoken to a lawyer. I don't think I'd ever met a lawyer. I'd certainly not spoken to or met a judge. I had no idea what I was getting into. And so I was very lucky because I went to the American Indian Law Center's Pre-Law Summer Institute, which is an 8-week sort of legal boot camp that is largely responsible for the numbers of Native lawyers that we have now. It was started in the early 70s, has run every summer since, including this summer. They did it virtually. And so I went to that, and I was very lucky because they really gave me a head start in terms of understanding what a case was, which I didn't even know that before I started law school. So, the idea of being a judge, much less a justice, was the furthest thing from my mind. It wasn't even on the list of possibilities of things that could happen. And frankly, if you had asked me a year ago if I'd be where I am now, I just thought it was just a dream that was not a possibility. There aren't a lot of examples of people like us being on courts like that, and certainly in the Native community, there's a couple of examples of people, but it seemed like such a stretch. So I started off by being a tribal court judge. I started as a judge from my own tribe. It was very important to me to serve my community. but it was also very difficult to be in a position of being a judge in my own community with families that I knew. And so that was where I started. It was very challenging in lots of ways, but I really learned a lot about the role of being a judge and what it's like to be sort of a more public person. I tend to be a very private person, so it was a challenging but good introduction. And then I just started working for tribes when we moved back up to Washington. We were in New Mexico. After law school, I went back to New Mexico and then came back up here a few years later. And I just started working again for tribes. There's so much need for people who can be good judges in tribal courts, and so much exciting work that's going on that I just kept doing it. And really over time, it just became clear that that was where my skills were. I loved teaching. I was good at teaching. It was really fun. But it was clear that this was the work that I was meant to do. And I'm really glad I've been able to do it, and very lucky.
Thank you, Justice Montoya-Lewis. I think that a lot of us appreciate you sharing those feelings, because especially coming from somebody so accomplished, I feel like a lot of us can relate to those types of feelings right now. So it's inspirational to hear that. You shared a little bit about it already, but we'd like to know if you could talk a little bit more about specifically some of the challenges and obstacles that you have overcome becoming a lawyer and then becoming a judge.
Yeah, I will, I'll just say that, the obstacle started day one of law school at UW. And some of you also probably heard me say this, but the very first interaction, literally the first interaction I had with another student at the University of Washington, was this woman walking up to me, and I thought she was coming to introduce herself, and she walked up to me and said, "You're taking my best friend's seat," turned around and walked away. That was my introduction to the University of Washington. And I had, it was very difficult. Law school was really hard for me. I felt like everything was in English, but it was in a language I did not understand. And it took a long time, even with that 8 weeks of the program I talked about, it was still really tough for me to feel like I was understanding what was happening. And I also really felt like maybe not everyone in my class, but so many people seemed to just know what was going on. And I could not figure out how they knew it. Eventually I found out that many of them came from families that had lawyers, and it was just part of their life. But it certainly hadn't been part of mine. So that, just that whole process through law school of both figuring out how to study and do it in a way that made sense to me, and then also finding what it was that was going to keep me motivated to continue doing it through those struggles was really a challenge. I had big financial challenges to stay in law school. I had opportunities to be on law review and do those kinds of things, and I could not do them because I had to work. There wasn't an option. So there were lots of things that people said, if you don't do this, you're never going to make it as a lawyer. If you're not on law review, you'll never get a clerkship. And none of those things proved to be true. I had, like I said, I didn't have an option to do that. I needed to make money. I did it the way I did it. And I applied for a clerkship, even though the Career Center said don't waste your time. I got one, and I got the only one I really wanted. I was very lucky because I identified someone as a justice who I thought would kind of understand those struggles. And she was one of those women that had been a first of a lot of things herself. And she was an incredible mentor to me. And I just, through the whole process of getting to this point, it's all been mentorship. If I hadn't had Justice Yu and Justice Gonzalez encouraging me from years ago to think about this possibility, it never would have crossed my mind. The same is true as going from tribal court to superior court. That idea would never have crossed my mind had other people not said, I want you to think about this, consider doing it. So, that's something that I think is really important. And I think Bailey mentioned, that I view part of my role is being about mentorship. I could not have gotten here without the support of, a couple of professors who were critical to me getting through law school, a couple of mentors who've been with me through day one and still are with me, support of my partner. Those are all things that, have been so important to me. And one of the things that I think is really important to say to students is I think you get told a lot that, you're accountable to yourself and everybody's like, judged on their own individual merit. And that's just so not the case. Like nobody gets to these positions alone. And so that, the support of your friends, your community, your teachers, and other people that you'll meet along the way is, I just think that we should be talking more about how important that is.
I could not agree with you more. Thank you so much, Justice Montoya-Lewis, for having the courage to be so transparent with all of us. We really appreciate it. As one of very few Indigenous law students at Gonzaga University School of Law, your presence and representation of our Native voices on the bench means more to me and to my entire family than I could ever express. And what I and so many other people are wondering, what does this phrase representation matters mean to you? And for members of our BIPOC communities who are aspiring lawyers, what advice do you have for us?
That phrase gets thrown around a lot, and I've said it and I believe it. But I've had two experiences that I think are the things that give meaning to that phrase for me. One was pretty early on in my Superior Court career. This would probably be around 5 years ago. I had someone on my criminal calendar who I had known from my work as a tribal court judge. And he was entering a plea. I was sentencing him to prison. And this was an agreed plea. And he had a request that his attorney did not really understand. She said he wants to be released for ceremonies. So I knew exactly what he was asking about because I had worked at LUMI for a long time. And the attorney said, there's someone here who wants to speak on his behalf. I also knew who that person was, but I also knew why they were speaking and what their role was. And the three of us, me, the defendant, and what we called his father, although it wasn't his biological father, then we talked about why it was important to release him for that, whether he'd come back to his report date, all of those things. I agreed to release him and wrote on the order a specific set of requirements for him if he was going to go. I had the attorneys and a number of attorneys, not just his attorney, come up to me at the end of the calendar and they said, you were all speaking English, but you were speaking a language none of us understood. None of us understood what you were asking about and, why that guy was there, but it was clear you did. And it was clear that what you did was something that was meaningful to my client, but I still don't really understand what's happening and where he's going. I probably could have done a better job in that moment of explaining what was happening because I think that was important for people in the court to understand. But it would not have happened if I had not been there, just because trying to explain it to someone would be very challenging. There were multiple kinds of those experiences that I had on Superior Court, and I think a lot about what had happened before I was there, what's happening now that I'm not there, and what's happening across the state when people have specific requests that it's a challenge to explain, and maybe not even anybody interested in trying to understand. So for me, I think representation matters for those kinds of reasons. And then since I've joined the court, I cannot tell you how blown away I've been by the letters I've received from all over the country. The kids 5, 6 years old coming up to me to tell me what it means to them that I am where I am. I had many reservations about applying for this appointment. It was a very big decision, and I had a lot of of questions about whether I should do it and whether this was the time and so on and so forth. And I had someone say to me, there are some things that are bigger than you. And there are some things that you do because it's important. And it's not about whether you want to do it. There's some things you're called to do. And, I was like, well, why, I'm not that special. Why is it me? And they're like, that's not your question. That doesn't matter. You're in this, you have this opportunity, you take it. So I think about that a lot when I have hard days on the court, and representation matters in a core way to my work that is almost inexpressible.
Thank you for that, Justice Montoya-Lewis. And let me just tell you that I'm so glad that you made the decision that you made, because you do mean a lot to many of us. Could you expand a little bit more on what value your cultural lens as an Indigenous woman has on the Washington State Supreme Court?
I've been asked that a couple of times. I've actually been asked that a couple of times today. And I have to say, it's one of those questions. It's like trying to explain, air to someone who, to a fish that breathes water, right? It's like, well, I'm not sure. I will say that when I very first started in practice, I had a very difficult situation arise in the law firm I was working at. I was only there for about 1.5 years. But in the first year, it became very clear that there was someone in the firm who was very important, who had a very serious drug and alcohol problem that no one was talking about. Everyone was pretending it wasn't there. And I had 2 options. One was to quit, because I was not going to work in a situation where that was going on and no one was doing anything, or to confront it. And neither of those seemed like particularly great options. And my husband said, you have to do what you believe is the right thing, and any decision you make that carries with it your own integrity will be the right decision, because you have to live with that decision no matter what it is. And that advice is something that has carried me through, decades at this point. So I lost track of your question. Say it again, Izzy. Just want to make sure I'm answering you.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Just about the lens, right? Is that right? About what it means to be, okay, thank you. Okay, so with respect to that, I have had people over the course of my career, from law school up until I had somebody say something to me 3 days ago, that there is a way to do this, to be a justice, or to be a law student, or to be a lawyer, to be a judge. And there's been not just messages, but people saying to me directly that you're not doing it that way. You're not doing it right. I have people say, you don't look like a judge, even after I'd been a judge for 20 years. The only way I know how to do this kind of work, and to do this kind of work on the Supreme Court, which is so super public, is to do it with my cultural values being the things that frame everything I do, because that's the best part of me. And so if I don't do that, then there's not integrity to what I'm doing. I can't feel good about that. So, whether that's right, quote unquote, or whether people want that is kind of not my problem. And I have to remember that when I say something that is imbued with who I am and what I believe, and it's rejected, that's not my problem. That I just have to do that, and I put it out there. And if that doesn't carry the day, then I move on to the next thing. But I don't know how to do it any other way. I've had countless people tell me, you got to cut your hair. That's not what a judge looks like. That's not what a lawyer looks like. People aren't going to take you seriously. Well, it's long for a reason. And, you're not entitled to know the reason, but it's not a conversation I'm going to have. But it's hard. I'm not going to tell you it's easy. It is not easy.
Thank you, Justice Montoya-Lewis. I know that you're in a very difficult spot, and I know that I speak for so many of us when I say that we don't just want your voice, on the Washington State Supreme Court, we need your voice there, and just know how much we value you and everything that you stand for.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So another question for you.
Mm-hmm.
We recognize that you have a very full plate as a Supreme Court justice,
Mm-hmm.
but one thing that we've noticed and that we absolutely adore about you is that you remain diligent about ensuring that decisions are informed by our most impacted communities. So how do you go about balancing your heavy workload with your clear commitment to our community?
I will start off by saying this goes back to what I said before, nobody does this alone. If I did not have the support of my clerks and my judicial assistant, who are fundamental to me being able to do this work, I wouldn't be able to do it. So I want to be clear about that. And also the support of my colleagues, having Justice Yu and Justice Gonzalez and others who have my back and have a commitment to the same things makes it much easier. But like I said, I don't really know how to do it any other way. As a tribal court judge, I was trained that my job as a judge was to understand the community and make decisions that were informed by that community's values. And sometimes they weren't the same as mine or what I was raised with. But I was expected to understand that. I don't have the same experience on the state court side of things. It's much more presented in a much more cut and dried way. This is the law, these are the facts, you apply them. And so I think it takes a lot more work to remember that you have to have those things informed by those viewpoints and frame things in terms of access. And I mean that in a very broad sense. But I think that the reason I've made time is because I kind of have to in order to do this well. And I think any of the other justices who make that kind of time, I don't necessarily want to speak for them, but I think it's also part of the lifeblood of what we do. So if we don't do that, we're not doing our job. So I don't really see it as extra. I see it as central.
Thank you, Justice Montoya-Lewis. And we thank you for making that time to be able to just be so committed. Today, we're honored to also introduce two people who have seen you balance your heavy workload and your commitment to the community. Justice Yu and Justice Gonzalez of the Washington State Supreme Court.
Justices, we are so honored to have you here today. We would love for each of you to share a story about Justice Montoya-Lewis's commitment to elevating the voices of our community members.
Mary, would you go first?
Well, rather than share a story, I think I'm going to pose another question to Justice Montoya-Lewis, only because there's nothing like having her share the rest of who she is and the values that she brings. So let me ask this question, if I may. And I'll start with saying she is brilliant, she is hardworking, she is remarkable as a colleague, and who she presents herself as today is who she really is. So I'm in complete awe of her. But all of us know that we're more than our work, right? We do other things. And one of the things that Justice Montoya-Lewis has so impressed me with is her baking skills. So I want her to share with you where she learned how to bake in the way that she does and what is her favorite thing to bake for the justices.
Okay, so I'll just back up and say that when I hired my judicial assistant, I hired her without knowing that she also on the side ran a cake making business. And then by happenstance, Ebony, who's on this call, I don't know that you can see her, but I can see her, she's waving. When we got to the court, turned out Ebony was an extraordinary baker. And those of you who've been working with Sarah, who's working on my campaign and was also a clerk until very recently for me, learned also how to bake while she was with us because the pressure was on. So, I love to cook, and I come from a community where, well, I think this is true for many of us, where food was really, really important. And in particular, Pueblo oven bread was the thing that, for me, the smell of that was like, that's home. It's typically cooked in an outdoor adobe oven. And so obviously I don't have one of those. That might kind of seem weird to people here. But that's what I love to bake. And I don't know that I got around to baking it for the justices. But I've stuffed most of the justices pretty full with English muffins lately.
Well, I don't know that I can top that with such a good question. Let me take a little bit of a different approach. When I joined the Supreme Court 9 years ago now, I was the second justice of color ever to have sat on the court, and my predecessor had retired a decade before I joined the court. And in some ways that made it a fairly lonely place. And I remembered that Justice Sotomayor, when she was being grilled during her confirmation proceedings, was criticized for having spoken of a wise Latina. So this is the picture from my chambers. These are the wise Latinas I had before these colleagues joined me. And I love them so much. I'm so glad that they're there. And I'm showing some emotion now because it means that much to us for them to be there. So we have to do everything we can to keep them on the court. And wise Latina, by the way, is redundant.
Wow. Justice Montoya-Lewis, we know that you have spent your life committed. And sorry, I had to take a pause. I think we just have to take that in. That was beautifully said, Justice Gonzalez. Thank you for sharing that. Justice Montoya-Lewis, we know that you have spent your life committed to juvenile justice work, and we've invited a lot of youth to learn from your life experiences on this call from all walks of life. I know I have a lot of friends here from Utah that are watching today. What words of wisdom do you have for your youth about the value of education?
So I'm going to say that education, particularly for kids of color, is really complicated. So, I come from a family history of removal. My great-grandmother was put on a train and sent to a boarding school across the country. My father was beaten for speaking his language in his high school classroom. They cut his hair. It wasn't a boarding school, but it might as well have been. So, by the time I came around, when I was born, my father had some real difficulty teaching me the language because for him it was a liability. He was afraid that I could be hurt for knowing my own language. And he wanted to arm me with the ability to talk the way I talk and to have the education that would allow me, I think his hope for me was to just be okay. And he said, you have to work 3 times as hard to get to be seen as just, passable. And that was his experience in the world, and it was his experience in his own career. He was very successful, but he was also, he was troubled by a lot of that experience in classrooms that he'd had. And I experienced that when I went to that summer program I talked about for Native Americans going into law school. It was the first time I had ever been in a classroom that was only Native kids, or I guess kids, but college graduates. I had never been in a classroom with only Native people. And I didn't actually know that. I didn't realize it until I was sitting in that room the very first day. And I was like, oh, and it felt completely different to be able to just speak as myself and not be seen by my classmates as speaking for who knows that what's in their mind. But I was speaking for others, not just myself, my entire education up until the point I got to that room. That experience really changed my life because it helped me to learn my own voice. And that was after graduating from college. So I think a lot of youth get the message that they are not okay being who they are. And it's really hard to be who you are in middle school anyway. So if you're being told that you're doubly not okay for all kinds of other reasons, holding on to a reason to keep going to school is really hard. But I am here to tell you it is worth it. And I think that my colleagues would say that as well. I was someone that grew up terrified of authority. The idea of like disappointing my dad and bringing home poor grades was like, it was just not going to happen. It was unthinkable. I never skipped school. I married someone who dropped out of high school. And I was like, who drops out of high school, man? Like, there wasn't somebody mad at you? And, they're like friends that would skip school. It just blew my mind. I would never have done that. And, I think that's not necessarily a great thing. Like, I think you have to break some rules to figure out who you are. And that part came for me later. But you still got to keep doing it, right? You still got to keep going. And it goes back to finding, even if all you can do is find one person who can support you through going to school, then hang on to that one person. Because you don't need a lot of people to encourage you. You just need one.
Thank you, Justice Montoya-Lewis. As a former middle school teacher, your commitment to youth means so much to me personally, and I know it means so much to so many people on this call. So thank you. I am still feeling a little bit emotional from all of these amazing questions and amazing responses. So we want to lighten the mood a little bit. Justice Montoya-Lewis, one thing that we love about you is your transparency and your relatability. And we have seen your furry friend Nikko make an appearance on your social media.
Yep.
My friend, let me grab him one sec. My friend, or my son rather, Lencho, has been begging to meet you and Nikko. And so we would all love to meet Nikko as well.
Well, unfortunately, Nikko is not feeling very well. So he's downstairs because he's fine. He just has a little bit of an injury and he's in the cone of shame. And so he's kind of sad, but that's him behind me.
Oh, he's beautiful. Thank you so much, Justice.
You're welcome.
I will put my furry friend back. 1 second. Okay. Thank you.
In my chambers, we routinely have a pet check-in, and Beverly, my new clerk, just got a puppy, and I can see Beverly, but you do not see her puppy, which is very disappointing.
Oh. Wow, I love that the Chambers does that. That is so special.
We're big on pets.
That's good. That's good to hear.
Oh, look, there she is. Those of you that can see Beverly Sy on your screen, she's now got Olive in her arms.
Oh, wow. Hi, Beverly. What a beautiful dog. Thank you, Justice Montoya-Lewis. So at this point in time, we would like to thank everyone who has submitted questions to the chat. It is now time to transition to our Q&A live, so I'm pretty excited. So first question from our amazing community members on this call. Justice Montoya-Lewis, one of the many virtues of your legal career is that it has been spent serving the community. What is it like transitioning to work as a justice, which I imagine is somewhat more insulated?
It's a lot more insulated. I'll be honest, I really miss working in tribal communities every day. That was that transition from tribal courts into Superior Court. I went from working with Native people every day, all day long, to being one of 2 Native people in the entire building, not just the court, but the whole building, this administrative building. So it was a significant change. And, you know, I think that continues to be the case. You know, that said, I think it's really, as I said, part of the job for me to be accountable to those communities. And I hear from people all the time, and I think that's the way it should be. I'm not interested in being inaccessible. You know, obviously there's lines and there's things you can't talk about and that sort of thing. And I'm okay with that, but it is really important to me. And one of the ways that I try to make sure I'm connected is to stay connected to students like you guys. You know, you're just like, you guys give me so much energy tonight, I can't tell you. And so that's part of how I do it. And you know, I have good friends from lots of different communities, all of whom hold me accountable every day to making sure that I'm not losing my way, because I think it's probably pretty easy to do. And you know, a year ago when I would talk to Justice U, I would walk away and think, like, she is so amazing. I can never be like that. I can never be in that position. Like, I just thought that all of the people on the Supreme Court were magicians. And I hope I never forget that feeling, because I know now that people feel like that about me. They don't feel that way about me. But other people do. And I hope I never forget the feeling of, you know, walking in the Supreme Court building and feeling like, you know, how is my name on that door? I hope I never forget that.
Justice Montoya-Lewis, thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think that I can speak for many of us on here where, I mean, you do mean that much to us. And if we give you energy, I feel like it's a two-way street, because you give us so much energy and inspiration just to think of the possibilities of what we can become. And we have another question for you, just hot off the presses from our audience tonight. It says, I'm a friend of Gonzaga law student and an educator. I'd love to hear your perspective on what you wish you heard as a student or inspiring educators in your life. I teach second grade, and I am always striving to become a better ally.
You know, I think that I went the entirety of my kindergarten through my senior year of high school without ever learning anything about Native American history, or really the history of people of color in in the U.S. My dad was in the Air Force, and so I grew up on Air Force bases all over the place. I was educated primarily in Department of Defense schools, very diverse student bodies in those schools. You know, there's the numbers of people of color who serve in the military very high. And so I went to school in really diverse classrooms. I don't think we ever talked about that. And that is something that I think was a real disservice to my own sense of connection to my own education. I mean, you know, I was saying, like, I was afraid to, you know, sort of fail. I actually think that's a bad thing. I think that you should learn how to fail and then get back up and figure out how to do something. Because I had to do that. I kind of did that in law school. Like, it was in law school where I was like, oh, I don't know if I can do this. And I had not really felt, I think some of what happened for me in education was this idea that what I needed to do was to do good on tests, and not so much know who I am and what that meant in terms of connection to my education and other things. So the point of saying all of that is that I think that if what we could do as educators is to help students find out, like, what their own passion is and how they're connected to the things that they're studying, you know, that just seems so critical to me. And I just feel like we're not really doing that. I certainly haven't seen it, you know, in my own kids' education. It's better, but it's limited.
Thank you, Justice Montoya-Lewis. I completely agree. And I love that you bring up the point about the importance of being student-centered in education, and also just, the duty to be culturally responsive to the needs of kids. I think that that's invaluable. Justice Montoya-Lewis, we have a pretty tough question for you now, and so buckle up. Earlier this summer, amidst the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic and the unrest from the police violence against Black and Brown communities, the Supreme Court of Washington wrote an open letter to the legal community stating, "Too often in the legal profession, we feel bound by tradition and the way things have always been. We must remember that even the most venerable precedent must be struck down when it is incorrect and harmful." That's powerful. And not long after issuing the open letter, the court granted diploma privilege to graduates of any ABA law school that were signed up to take the July Washington bar exam. And this decision is something that has opened the door to a conversation about a more just and equitable licensing requirement for law school graduates. So our question for you, do you think that the court is open to having a conversation about moving to a permanent diploma privilege for graduates of Seattle U Law, University of Washington Law, and Gonzaga University School of Law?
So I think it's really important that you guys understand that if it had not been for the advocacy of students, it never would have happened. So I'm going to say that again. If it had not been for the advocacy of you, it would never have happened. So certainly the support of deans was very important. The response from students to the decision to grant diploma privilege this year was really helpful. If that is something you want the court to continue to consider, then I think you need to be vocal about it, because there's two reasons. One is we are overloaded with things that need to get done, right? There's just all kinds of things that are coming across our desks, and so the priority gets higher the more we kind of you remind us that it needs to be something we take up. The second thing is that I've been tasked to start a task force to look at licensing requirements and why we do them the way we do them, and whether we're doing it equitably. And I take that very seriously, and I'm in the process of putting all of that together. And once that is together, and we've got it going, that's another place where I think hearing from you about the reality of what it means to you to be faced with taking the bar exam, I think really matters. I think this year was very unusual. It continues to be a very unusual year. I can't and would not make any kind of commitment about what we're going to do going forward. But again, it wouldn't have happened if the students hadn't been as powerful as they were in bringing the point to our attention.
May I say one thing about that topic? I was an advocate early on for diploma privilege, but I think everyone has to assume for now that you'll have to take the bar exam. If that changes and if the advocacy is successful, great, but do not bank on the possibility of it happening. Proceed as if you're going to need to take that worthless exam to become a lawyer.
So I have to tell you, I have to get off because I have another Zoom I have to be on in 5 minutes, and they're texting me, "Where are you?" So I think I will have to sign off. And I know that you guys wanted to make sure everybody stayed on even after I left, because I also have to leave for other reasons. So I'm gonna leave now, but I want to thank you all so much for hosting me. It's been really amazing, and I hope you'll all take up what I said, which is that I do not want to be an inaccessible justice. So reach out. Okay. All right. Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Lewis. Thank you for sharing your story and vision with us.
You're
We appreciate
welcome.
it so much.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this call today. And on behalf of the Latina Latino Student Association at Gonzaga University School of Law, we would like to thank you we'd like to thank Justice Montoya for sharing her story and her vision with all of us. And we are honored to know her and to support her.
And Justice Yu and Justice Gonzalez, thank you so much for spending time with us today. We really admire your advocacy and believe so deeply that your voices add value.
Our pleasure.
Thank you. And to everyone who took the time to join us tonight, we'd like to thank you as well for being here. We are so encouraged by the strength of the community and the numbers that were shown today.
Thank you so much, everyone. Stay safe and healthy.
Thank you very much.